In the 5 years we've been running HATM, there's been one consistent joke, which is that I hate musicals. And for the longest time, I thought this was true. I mean, come on, folks. Who breaks into song and dance at any given moment in the middle of any number of things, whether they're in love, going to war, if it's going to be Christmas? And I always thought this was true until someone pointed out the other day that, Jason, you break into song and dance more than any other human being I've ever met in my life. And this shook my world, because it's probably true. It's not a coincidence that every single week that I would take off on HATM, when I would need a break, we would schedule musicals. So many of you have been asking for musicals, whether it's West Side Story, Guys and Dolls, Platoon. Platoon is not a musical, I'm being told. That I would ask for Sara Georgini to come in and run the show so that we could have musicals, but therefore I wouldn't have to sit back and watch Moulin Rouge with the rest of you. So when the podcast comes around, I immediately have to ask Sarah to jump on. And we've been trying to put this pod together for about 3 months, this particular episode. And I say, Sarah, what episode do you want to do? What movie do you want to watch? And she says, Jason, you're watching Guys and Dolls, goddammit. She may not have said, goddammit. I definitely thought, goddammit, when she said it. I have to watch a musical. We couldn't watch Jurassic Park. We're watching Guys and Dolls. And so I did. 3 days ago, I watched Guys and Dolls. All of it, for what felt like an eternity. But I kind of liked it. And that kind of gets into today. And if you know anything about Sarah, Sarah comes to this pretty honestly. She actually has a background in dancing. She's a ballerina, which I didn't know, but is. In addition to being an awesome historian. She's actually a scholar of early America. She works the papers of John Adams up in Boston. She's amazing. She's scary how smart she is. You're going to hear that in our conversation today. And you're going to hear her take this episode and break down all of these things for Guys and Dolls, talking about what this film had to say in 1955 when it came out, what it's saying about the era in which it is set in 1933. We're going to talk about the dynamics between Brando and Sinatra. And we're ultimately going to recast this film in 2023 and talk about what that means today. And yes, maybe you'll hear my picks for greatest musicals of all time, or at least my favorites, because apparently I have favorite musicals. This is a fun episode. So sit back, relax, and get ready. Because we got a horse right here. The name is Paul Revere. And if the track is fast and the weather's clear, can do. Guys and Dolls is next on Historians of the Movies podcast. Hey, Sara Georgini, how you doing?
Hey, Jason. It's good to be here. Hello from Boston, everyone.
Boston? Today is St. Patrick's Day. Are you okay? Are you safe?
Perfectly safe, happy, and well, and also celebrating Evacuation Day when we kicked the British troops out of Boston in 1776. So raise a glass of your select beverage to that.
Okay, all right. Actually, speaking of select beverage, let's go ahead and get you on the record right now. Coke or Pepsi?
Pepsi.
And that was Sara Georgini. Thank you so much for joining in to Historians of the Movies podcast. It's been a great day. I'm Team Coke right now.
I don't drink soda very often, to be honest.
I do actually, because one of the things I want to do is become the size of one of those cheesecakes that Sinatra was eating early on in this movie. I want to give myself the gift of diabetes is what I'm trying to do. So hence that
cheesecake is really the only thing anyone gets to eat for 3 hours in that entire musical. It's really something to see. It's such a consumerist fable that any historian would love. And yet that's the only tangible food you get is cheesecake.
Well, to be fair, Bacardi's food, right? So milkshakes when they go to Havana. But we'll get into Marlon Brando here in a little bit. Also, 3 hours, that's a lie. I watched this movie for 14 hours yesterday. This movie did not end. So there was the problem with that, because you and I have been trying to do this pod over this movie in particular. You've been teasing me about my love of musicals for years now, and we've been trying to do this, and I've been putting it off. And I know this. I'll get into like some of the stuff here in a bit, but like, made me fucking watch Guys and Dolls. Why? First of all, let's back up. Who the hell are you? For our audience who don't know, they were like, "What's Evacuation Day in Boston?" Like, all right, Sarah, tell our lovely audience like what you do and such, and why does your work relate to Guys and Dolls and Marlon Brando? I want to hear you tie 1776,
sure.
Boston, John Adams, and Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra together. Go.
I can do it. So I think that first off, I'm Sara Georgini. I'm series editor for the Papers of John Adams, which is part of the Adams Papers editorial project based at the Massachusetts Historical Society. We publish the private and public letters of John and Abigail Adams and their descendants, make them freely available in our digital editions on the MHS website and elsewhere. So I am passionate and always have been about bringing primary sources to the people and people to the primary sources. That's why I went into public history. And I've been at MHS almost 15 years now. But I really do love a musical when I need to kind of turn off the 18th century a little bit and escape back to the 20th or 21st century. I think that musicals, much like even the epistolary novels of the early 19th century, can teach us so much about how people imagine their lives can be, right? So I like to think that any day I'll walk down the street and everyone will break into a song and dance number. That's just my personal, like, I wish that would happen. But when it doesn't, musicals are there for me. I grew up with a steady diet of musicals. I sang and danced as a kid and still keep up the dancing, let's put it that way. So it's really fascinating for me to see how people explore culture outside their workday. And if I had to make a real quick connection between the second president of the United States
You do actually,
and the guy from the waterfront, I would say John Adams and the whole family loved theater. They absolutely loved to go to the musicals of their day, which was theater in Paris, London, and later Boston and Philadelphia. So real arts fans all around.
We talked a lot, like, and of course with HATM, for people who've come to this, like, I always refer to you in jest, but kind of really as our musical director, because it's no secret that whenever I have to dip out for a week, there's a musical, and I'm like, oh, Sarah, will you do it? Because this way we can get our musical people in. Of all these films that we've been talking about doing, I was like, hey, what do you want to do? You were like, Guys and Dolls. Why this? I assume we're going to do more than just this film at some point in time, but like, why Guys and Dolls for you? Why was this the first salvo, if you will, in your musical assault on the HATM podcast?
I had the really great good fortune to run Historians of the Movies for musicals that I loved before, like the original West Side Story and for Les Miserables and Annie, all musicals that are near and dear to my heart. And I think I have the lyrics just about memorized for any of them. Guys and Dolls may be just a tad long for a Sunday night movie, I think. But there's so much to, I know a historian would say unpack, but let's put that historian hat aside for a moment and just say explore. Like, there's so much going on here about women and men and how 1955 reimagined 1933, how quickly there's a hard shift from what the post-war period imagines that interwar period to be. I find that absolutely fascinating. Also, I grew up with this. I mean, I can't tell you how many versions I've seen in different high schools and different friends' plays, things like that, how many times I've heard it in any kind of audition tape. It's so interesting to me that people relate to this, because when you see it from the very get-go, from the opening, it is this sticky, sweet palette of color. All the characters are a little sweeter than you expect. All of the actors in it are playing hard against type. Like, they are never these kinds of people in any other movies that they do, which is really interesting to me. The songs are catchy and they're just about the right length for anything to move the plot along. And if I had to say one more thing, and I'm going to say a lot more, Michael Kidd's choreography is just chef's kiss. It is so dynamic, so vibrant, and it really represents a total change. Just as musicals are kind of petering out, in the mid 1950s, and they're going to kind of fall into decline theatrically for a couple of decades. He has this idea of an integrated musical where the dance serves the plot, and it's really amazing to see what he does. Plus, how could you resist seeing if Brando could sing or not, right? Like up against Sinatra, like who wouldn't tune in for that?
Well, I mean, I've got a couple thoughts on that. First is the length of the film, right? So for people who like try to do HATM, we typically try to keep the film at about 2 hours or under. And I think this one clocks in about 2.5 or so. So if we just got rid of all the musical parts of this film, it would be fine. It would fit right in. That we would just have a story and people go to Cuba. It'd be like Miami Vice, really, now that I think about it. So, and yeah, you're absolutely right. And we were texting last night, as I was watching this, I was like, this is not Sinatra as Danny Ocean, although the names are outstanding, right? The character names are just Nathan Detroit. Oh, so
he's Cy Masterson. That's a pretty baller name to walk in. And then you find out his real name is Obadiah, which just serves the plot so beautifully, right? I mean, like he has the backstory.
What's your backstory with this movie, with this particular? Were you introduced to it like as a play in high school? Did you come to the film itself? Like, because I've got some very specific memories of this movie, but I'll get into that in a second. So, how are you introduced to Guys and Dolls? Like, what was your first impressions of this thing?
So I have to say we were big Channel 13 geeks in our house growing up. Anything that was a musical or on great performances was something that we watched. I'm sure I either saw it there or way back when we first got a VCR, we most likely went and rented it. I can tell you that West Side Story was the first movie we ever saw on a VCR. On our first color TV, I grew up with a black and white TV for a couple of years, and just the explosion of color and music and dance was remarkable to me. So I think that's how I knew it. I knew it first as like the video that we rented on a Friday night. That was a big treat. And then it just kind of rebounded. What about you? Because I think you know the opener song.
I do. Actually, real quick though, where was Channel 13? Where are you growing up at this point in time?
So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and you'll notice that New York is a major character in Guys and Dolls, and it is a completely imagined New York. It is wild. There are parts of it that don't track, and there are parts that do. So, the trash-colored and trash-cluttered, I should say, Times Square, the kind of cheek-by-jowl drugstore and betting arena, and all people hustling back and forth. The only thing it doesn't get quite right in Guys and Dolls, and I remember thinking about this the first time I saw it, even as a kid, is it's a very white New York in Guys and Dolls. Not a lot of diversity, even in the Times Square crowd scenes. So there are parts of it that rang true as a New Yorker watching it for the first time and the millionth time, and there are parts where I was like, really?
Well, for those of us who are like listening from like my home state of Kentucky, like a VCR was actually powered by this thing called electricity. And now that this is widely available in Kentucky now, but in the 1980s, rarely so. So I just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page now that we're connecting. I didn't come to this movie naturally. Actually, my very first introduction to Guys and Dolls was actually in a movie called Oh God, You Devil Part 2. Which actually starts... There's a major part of the scene where the father has, and it's been a year since I've seen this, sings to his son the fugue for Tin Horns, right? I got the horse right here. The name is Paul Revere, and all that. And it was like this way of calming himself and calming his son down when his son was sick. And so when my son was very sick, he had like this really bad ear infection when he was like infant. It got the bones had got infected in his ears. We had to go to the hospital, all this kind of stuff. I found myself singing this song to my son Jack when Jack was like an infant. Only I didn't know all the words, so I just kind of got to the can do part and would just start over and over and over again. But it was the only thing I knew. So there was an affinity with the song, and of course, Sinatra and Brando. So I knew like going in, I teased you about this, but when you were like Guys and Dolls, I was like, fine. I'll finally do this. And I knew going in I would end up liking the film, which of course I actually did very much.
Yay!
But that's how I kind of come to it. Yeah, I know, I'm convinced, Jess. And it's weird because profess hatred for musicals. It's like I always find it like people don't just break out into song whenever doing stuff. And then it was pointed out to me the other day that Jason, you were never not singing. Like people that know me, like in my personal life, who see me like a day to day basis, say that I sing more than I actually speak. Like I'm apparently always like I slip into this thing and I just start singing about whatever all the time. In dancing, I'm actually what most people would refer to as a fool. So actually, maybe it's actually this is probably closer to the reality to me that people would drop into song and start singing about gambling or love or anything else. So that's my very long winded way of saying that that's how I came to the film or play, I guess. And as I tweeted this out, a lot of people were saying, "Hey, I was in this play in high school. Like this is apparently a very popular high school play." So if Ron DeSantis is listening right now, I would like for him to know that we're indoctrinating our children into gambling and vice via plays, and we should probably ban plays and musicals along with books and other things. So I'm just going to go and put that on the register for things for us to do later on. I'll just go ahead and put there. So I'm feeling feisty today. I'm just whatever. It's Friday, St. Patrick's Day.
That's okay. Guys and dolls can bring it out in you. That's all right. It's a militant movie in places, so it does galvanize you.
I hadn't thought about it, but it has, you're absolutely right. Like, so as you were kind of launching into, I think, one of the things I always try to do is like we try to historicize these films, right? And this particular film has a bunch to say about not only say 1955 when it's released, but also the eras in which it's like memorized, casting memory on. And then of course the way that we can probably remember both say 1933, 1955, and apparently they're trying to make a new version of this film, which I'm a little scared of.
I saw that.
Yeah, I like Channing Tatum, but I don't know that I don't know that I'm ready for. I don't know, Magic Mike 4, Cuba. I don't know if they could make it. So let's talk about this movie. Where do you want to go?
Sure.
And let's talk about like why you love this thing.
So I think something that's really interesting about this movie to me is the choreography. So I danced as a kid. I did ballet. I did tap. I was on point for a while. And when I wrapped up the pandemic, I went back to it. So I've been kind of hardcore back at ballet for a little while now. And it's really interesting for me to kind of get back into that headspace because I learned to write as a kid, to read and write the same time that I was learning dance. So, fairly young, like kindergarten, first grade. And to me, the two things are wholly interrelated. So I love to watch anything where there's a lot of dance. I love to think about how choreographers make a body move, drive the plot. It's really fascinating to me because something you see with Michael Kidd's choreography. So he's the year before Guys and Dolls came out, he did another musical. He did a lot before that, but he did a musical. Most people know Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and this incredibly athletic. You do. So the barn raising dance, like very athletic, very acrobatic.
We watched this in Louisiana growing up. Like when I was down there, I remember this is like a little like I remember this when my name was Jason Abear. So yeah. The brothers, and in my mind, it's been forever. I remember like dudes with like brown hats or like brown on their body. I don't quite remember. Mountains.
You got it. No, you got it.
I don't know.
But back to the choreography. So something you notice, I gotta talk about it because I love it so much, and this is what you're paying for here on this pod. So I want to talk about it because he has this really epic kind of style. If you think about how like Gene Kelly dances. Gene Kelly improv'd pretty much everything, but when he worked with Michael Kidd, he was to the letter on every step. So that tells you how much he had thought through how to choreograph things. And so Kidd is very influenced by people like Charlie Chaplin. Think about how Chaplin moves. Everything is very ordinary, but very articulated, very exaggerated. Like you take a very ordinary motion and you make it larger than life. Think of him like doing his little penguin walk down a train platform. So it's a very simple kind of a thing, but it gets exaggerated just the right inch. So that's Michael Kidd. Like he has this way of making things pop and expand. My absolute favorite dance number in this movie is the Craps Ballet, because it is so genius. The game toward the end, and I'm trying not to give spoilers, but I may get spoilers.
This movie is like 60 years old. You cannot spoil a movie that came out in 1955.
The past was someone's future once, as we well know. So I want to be real careful.
Listen, I should have been the last man in America that saw this film. If you haven't seen this movie already, that's your own damn fault. So, I guess pause the film, go watch this movie because it's like 9 hours long, and then come back.
But it's so worth it. Watch a little every night. Like, pace yourself.
Yeah.
Like a fine
Dostoevsky.
Like,
right.
A little bit at a time. But the Craps Ballet is so great because you can actually kind of, if you follow the movements, you understand the card game. Like, it's a way of giving a narrative where you see people react. It's very simple choreography in some ways, like a few pirouettes, a few jetés. Everyone is kind of in tight trio formation. You might have, when you look at it, you might think, oh, I've seen this before. Think of that iconic opener for West Side Story. Doesn't it have some of the same kind of moves, right? And everyone is kind of in that very, yeah. Well, I mean, Jerome Robbins has such an incredible kind of influence over everyone too. But I think that Craps Ballet is so great because they could have told that story a couple of different ways, right? Could have had a lot of dialogue, could have been a song. Why could you just do it through dance? This is something I love about musicals, is where they make a narrative choice to be like, we could do a song, we could do a dance number, we could have a little bit of dialogue. Why did they choose this? Like, that's what keeps me engaged, I think, in musicals, because it's the same thing when you're writing history. You have to think about what sources you're going to pull, what genre you're going to write in, which characters are where on the stage. And you can make different choices about how to tell different parts of the story. So to me, when I watch a musical, it's like a reset from my writing. I have a chance to kind of think about, oh, I don't have to be so linear, or I maybe want to bring in someone you don't expect. There's no reason they have to tell a card game because the whole movie is about gambling. But think about how many card games you actually see in it. You don't, do you? You hear about gambling for 3 hours, but you don't really get much. And that could have been like the gangbusters way of doing it. I think of a movie, like for a complete opposite, think of Casino Royale, where you have like a long, steady kind of way of telling the story through the card game. And if you're really good at gambling, you get the story. But if you don't know anything about gambling, you don't really get the story so much. And I think Guys and Dolls is very approachable in both ways in that respect. So the choreography to me is just brilliant because it pushes things along when it needs to. And it's so simply done. Like, it's not technically difficult. And since it comes from a radio play and then it comes from a stage musical and then it goes to Hollywood, I mean, Kid did the choreography, I think, for the stage play as well, for the musical. So it's something that translated well, which was something people were just kind of learning to do in that period, right? To make something that could move from platform to platform like that. That's super interesting to me. I did go down the rabbit hole a little bit on Michael Kidd, I have to say, in prepping for this, because who wouldn't prep? But I got to tell you, he also kept choreographing.
I'm raising my hand for lack of prepping.
I want to say, let me just inform your viewers and listeners that there is a music video he did from our youth, Jason, that has all kinds of Guys and Dolls shout outs down to the trashy streets and the random musicians and the big jetés. And it's Janet Jackson's When I Think of You. Like, if you queue up that video, it is very Guys and Dolls. But like, that's him 30 years later, still rocking it out. That's pretty impressive for a dancer.
Actually, right now, my mind is thinking about what James Bond films would look like if they had a dance number. Like, who would be the best dancer of the James Bond? Like, definitely not Roger Moore, because he might fall apart. You know, I'm thinking actually maybe Timothy Dalton.
Could be Timothy Dalton, but don't sleep on Pierce Brosnan, because in Remington Steele, he was forever getting some kind of like wine and dine dance scene that he was able to rock.
Listen, like, we can show Pierce Brosnan the love because it's St. Patrick's Day and he's the Irish Bond and all that, so that's fine. I think Craig would be good too.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, I don't know who was the guy who did the one who was in the We're getting off track. I don't care.
We'll have a separate Bond roundtable for all the Bond fans in their legion.
Oh, we're like we've got a list of like there's about to be a Star Trek series coming up with like Robert Green II, who's going to be doing these.
Oh,
And yeah, it's going to be messy because I don't like Star
he
Trek.
knows his stuff.
Okay. So but he doesn't know that I don't like Star Trek, so it's gonna be fun. I mean, it's okay.
How could you not like Star Trek?
I like the idea of Star Trek, but like if you look at like, oh, have we decided on a Klingon design yet? And like Star Trek's like the most impressive part of costuming in Star Trek films are the toupees for Shatner et al. So I'm gonna lay that out there. It's a forthcoming thing to come back to. Nobody liked Shatner, and then that brings me back to the fact that there was beef, you say, between... God, I'm good at segues. Also, I'm going to write into a musical number. I tried to write a musical number actually into my dissertation. My advisor was like, cows don't dance, Jason. And I was like, maybe they should. Anyway, Sinatra. Sinatra didn't get along with Brando.
Yeah, so here's the thing. Frank Sinatra wanted that Sky Masterson role. He wanted it bad, and he didn't get it. It went to a guy not known for his singing, who I guess Sinatra tagged as Mumbles during rehearsals. But the movie version of Guys and Dolls went through a couple of different cast ideas before everyone kind of settled in. Gene Simmons was never like this in really any other movie she did. She was usually kind of like the sultry, hot stuff heroine. She was not the buttoned up,
I was in love with her.
Mission girl. Yeah, it was a very different. The director, yeah, exactly. And the person there who's really, I mean, there's some Broadway recognizable faces there. I mean, Vivian Blaine, who looks the most comfortable in her role as Miss Adelaide, had been doing that in the US, the UK, and my personal favorite, she was the part of the cast that I think took Guys and Dolls to the Strip. It was the first big Broadway show to play in Vegas, which if you were going to pick one, obviously Guys and Dolls is the one to do, right? So she seems like the one who's most at home in her character. But I guess Brando and Sinatra clashed right from the get-go. That's the long and the short of it. And Sinatra wanted it because, Brando gets to be the romantic crooner star. And that's what Sinatra had kind of built his image on. But Sinatra was tanking at the time. He pretty much had to pay people to let them put him in movies. Brando was way on the ascent, right? So it was really interesting to kind of see this cast that went through a couple of things. No one is playing the kind of person they're ever going to play again or had played before, which makes it an interesting movie in that respect. But I think you definitely you feel a chill when the two of them are sharing a screen, right? It's just not the cheeriest of relationships.
There's not a lot of chemistry between the two of them. And I was saying this to you yesterday, but like I come to know Brando obviously through Godfather, and then actually I think and then Apocalypse Now, and then The Island of Dr. Moreau. I think was like the fourth time I'd ever seen him on screen. So that's how I know Marlon Brando. I don't know Marlon Brando growing up as like seriously handsome Marlon Brando, just like the guy people said may have been, one of the most handsome guys ever. And it's like, how could Sinatra even, like, you can't compete with that. I mean, Brando steals this movie in my mind. He's just too smooth. And I'd never seen him like this.
Yeah, he's the most relatable, certainly. Like, he is definitely the charmer of the piece. I think that, he and Sinatra kind of have dueling, let me angle my fedora moments from time to time, right? They're both kind of jostling for the screen.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because to me, Brando is the only one who gives his character some kind of emotional arc to go on. I mean, the women don't get real big emotional arcs, and slapping on a happily ever after marriage at the end is hardly, to my mind, the best way to end a show, but you're ending a show and that's the way they often end, especially in 1955. So, I mean, Brando is the one who you really don't know if he's going to change in time. He has this brilliant capacity, I think, as an actor to very quietly make himself the pivot of the whole plot. I mean, that's just genius, right? Like, there are so many other if, when, maybe, should, could things that happen in pretty much any Brando movie. But
Mm-hmm.
somehow, just kind of secretly turning the springs and making everything happen, which is even when he's not on screen, you're thinking, what is that guy doing? He's off
Where is he?
screen
Where
for
is he?
too
Yeah.
long, right? I mean, that's kind of fun. And you're right, absolutely. He was, the hottest guy, the handsomest actor in Hollywood at the time. He was the guy to get. And you can see why. He's very charming, very smooth, but he has some depth. And I think Sinatra has exactly one moment where he tries to steal back the spotlight really bad, which is the So Sue Me, which he croons more than anything to
Mm-hmm.
Adelaide at the end, which I don't
Mm-hmm.
think the director liked, because you can't have two romantic leads really in one movie in this period. So they're very much fighting back and forth. But all that to say, yeah, I think Brando walks away with it all.
He really does. And, my favorite scenes of this actually came not only from like My Love the Caribbean, but just as a historian, this idea of zipping down to Havana. And I was like, oh man, this is such a moment in time. 1955, you wouldn't think twice. Of course you could zip down to Havana. And, it's weird that we talk about Brando in Godfather in this particular film, because Savannah plays a very important role, obviously in Godfather Part 2, and so forth. So it's kind of got these weird ties to it, in some ways. But watching this as a timepiece that comes out in
Mm-hmm.
'55, these post-war years. I wonder maybe you could and you would kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, kind of talk a little bit about what this movie has to say about its time and say the era back in
Yeah,
'55.
so that's one of my favorite kind of ways that musicals suspend belief, right? You can just head on to Cuba for dinner and you'll be back in an hour by train. And I was like, even as a kid, I was like, what train would that be on the New York City subway? Like, how would that work?
An aquatic train, yes.
Exactly. And it's such an interesting and exotic kind of trip for them. I think that is really interesting because it is, they're interacting somewhat with Cuban culture. The first thing that Sarah Brown does is start looking up church information as a tourist. You
Mm-hmm.
think like you're on vacation, do something different. But people kind of gravitate to something familiar when they're in a completely different landscape, and it happened to be that. So as someone who's written about religious tourism, I thought like, yes, this tracks. That was one moment where things were just completely wild in the plot, but then one little detail was anchoring me, and I was like, okay. But in terms of thinking about it as a 1950s production, I thought so much about Fox and Lear's and their writing and, fables of abundance and conspicuous consumption. When you look at this candy colored movie, everything is about consumption, right? People are constantly, whether it's gambling, whether it's, you know, new fashions, whether it's the relationship between women and men. That Adelaide song at the Hot Box, Take Back Your Mink, is wonderful because, yes, it's about relationships, but it's also about luxury goods and what things cost. And when you think about the fact that Damon Runyon turned out this story on or about 1933, that's a very different moment of imagining luxury versus just sheer perseverance in the thick of the Depression, right? And so the 1950s version of it is kind of glamorized. Everyone has sparkling new clothes. All the people who kind of pass you by in those crowd scenes in Times Square have like healthy little kids and brand new carriages. And, it's a very rosy glow that they have on things. It's a little different than, say, Annie, which is very much making the Depression the whole plot twist, right? So I think it's very interesting when people kind of gravitate to a very dark period and glam it up like this. But that's the point. It's meant to be a little escapist. I mean, all the glittering signs in Times Square. So for me, it's really about the post-war period trying to give themselves a backstory for what they're doing. Saying, oh, we were like this in the 30s. No, you weren't.
No, it seems to be like there's this moment. Of course, we say post-war period. Of course, we're still dealing with Korea in the 1950s, although it's kind of forgotten about. Um, we call it the Forgotten War, right? But it's like when we look back on 1955, post World War II, we haven't gotten sucked into as a society into Vietnam yet. It feels like there's it almost feels like the brightness of those early colors of the film are almost like symbolic of the era in Hollywood itself. At least that's kind of the way I kind of phrase these films when I'm looking at these mid 50s films. It just seems so happy. I can't quite explain why it's such an uplifting time cinematically.
Well, and I think I need a real film historian to explain this to me because I don't know enough on this front, but I know it's shot in CinemaScope. So there's a new tech that make it so everything really pop at this point, and they're really exploiting it. Like everything is drenched in color, everything is multi-dimensional, but you always know that you're looking at a stage set in places. Like, you know how they zoom out a little bit and there's a flatness to some of the buildings, and they didn't try to cover it up. Like they did not care. And I was like, oh, well, that is interesting to me. Like this is not like too much wizardry at once. There's very much an idea of we're trying to condition the 1950s movie audience to this new kind of technology. I mean, and that is kind of interesting as well, that they're thinking about how to kind of segue people into what the movie experience is going to be like. And perhaps, that's exactly what they needed, was to kind of pace it a little bit. I think that's so interesting when you can detect kind of shifts in technology, and musicals, I think, are particularly innovative in making use of that, whether it's, thinking about your tracking shots differently or thinking about close-ups differently. There's not a ton of close-ups in this movie, and I think that the cinematographer resisted what you'd usually have as a cue, which is a very tight shot when two people are singing and dancing, and then breaking it up with a couple big wide crowd scenes dancing. So there's no obvious cue when you're headed into a song or a dance in this movie. You kind of have to like sit there and pay attention to it all. Did you notice that too? I thought that was really interesting on a rewatch.
Okay, so actually, one of my best buddies today was actually talking about watching Heat for the very first time, which does not need a musical number. But, one of the most famous scenes from there is the diner scene between Pacino and De Niro. So I was watching this last night and this wasn't a musical scene, but with the cheesecake scene, when Brando and Sinatra first sit down, the camera just kind of locks in place for a while, where you traditionally expect to see the camera kind of play in on their faces a little bit more and move around. And eventually it does. But I was kind of noticing when it's not in a musical setting, the camera is kind of static. It kind of holds frame a lot. And I hadn't never really had a chance to think about it, but those were some immediate perceptions of mine. It was like, I don't know if maybe that was just common for the era or the director at the time, but there wasn't a lot of camera play when people weren't moving their bodies. But I did have a question for you. We're talking a little bit, you've mentioned a few other musicals already, obviously, Seven Brides, and then obviously West Side Story. Are musicals changing in 1955? Where's the trajectory of this movie going as far as where musicals are going? How are things changing?
They're kind of about to fall into decline. This is kind of like the golden age, and then it's going to tip off for a while. And then I think you really don't, you have a shift where musicals are incredibly popular on stage, not necessarily on screen for the next few decades. You have some great revivals. You have a lot more touring companies starting to develop, but you don't really see the big movie musicals start to come in again until Chicago, Moulin Rouge. There's a few, like Annie is really an outlier in that respect. An orphan victory, one might say, for the American musical theater crowd, because it's very random. Like it's very random that it picks up as it does into a movie stratosphere. But you don't really start to see that until, Chicago starts to rack things up. And that is also a brilliant movie that we should do on HATM.
There's a movie I'm thinking about right now, Michael Douglas, A Chorus Line, if I recall correctly. Was that
Yep,
late 80s? But
I
I
think
don't
so.
know
Yeah.
that I haven't seen it forever. I don't know that necessarily that's a musical so much as a movie about
Yeah.
Broadway. And I seem to remember, Hugh Jackman has been the biggest advocate of this in the popular imagination, saying, "Hey,
He's
we need."
amazing.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the new Deadpool versus Wolverine film will have it.
He has a great
I
voice, and
want a Deadpool Wolverine musical.
he is just an A plus all arounder. I think when it
Is
comes
he good?
to being an actor. Oh yeah, he is an excellent singer, dancer, you name it. And really, that's where his roots are. So I'm not surprised. You can kind of tell right off the bat. I mean, I thought him playing Wolverine was also just kind of
I'm
fun.
kind of wondering if we're about to get the stereotyping of Australians as necessarily musical people, but I'll let the HATM AUS crowd dive into that. We did in a Crocodile Dundee one,
Yes,
but that wasn't.
I defer to the experts in the room.
I'll talk to Joel and Chelsea about this and see their thoughts. I'm not afraid of getting in trouble.
Well, I think actually that's it's really interesting to me to think about the musical theater tradition. And we've been talking a lot about Guys and Dolls because there's one more thing that's distinctive about it. It is so quintessentially American, right? Like this is very much clearly an American musical. And you think of musicals that have evolved since that are made for more diverse audiences, certainly, but also meant to travel the world, right? So there's a reason Les Mis is popular when it's popular, right? There's a reason that Phantom of the Opera runs for so long. There are things that translate and there are things that don't. And I would be curious to know, does Guys and Dolls get performed around the world as much, or is it something that is just too American in some ways? There is such a strong assertion in some ways that this is an American musical. So one of the very particular things about Damon Runyon's writing, as I'm sure you noticed, is that there are very few contractions, right? This is this conceit that all of these gamblers and low-level criminals are faking some higher education they didn't have. So to sound learned, they do not use contractions, and they're
Right.
precious few even in the songs. And it is a very distinctive thing. In the stage version, the actor who initiated the role of Nathan Detroit played him more as a Jewish American. Now, Frank Sinatra plays him more with kind of a Bronx inflection, right? Like it's a very different kind of vibe. Even the gamblers who show up, like Big Julie, I mean, they have a very distinctive kind of accent. And you think about that a lot. I mean, Gene Simmons, who I believe is British, uses just enough of it to sound super prim, but not necessarily anything else. And Sky Masterson just sounds like Marlon Brando, but it is a soft tenor. It is not what you're going to hear as the Godfather. it's a very different, smooth, sweet voice. I always think he has kind of a caramel voice in this movie, more than anything else. But all of the accents you hear are kind of American. Like it's very much a movie about the American underworld and nothing else. And even the gamblers, there's some honor among thieves, right? There's some sense of like, we're all in this business. It's somewhat lowercase d democratic to be a gambler in this period. It's interesting to me. I just wonder about that, the Americanness of it and how important that was in the post-war period, right? That would have connected with audiences.
Well, I want to think about this movie now. So you take this movie in 1955. There is talk of remaking this film or making it anew. Does this movie change? Do you have to set it in the 1930s or the 1950s if you're going to make it in, say, 2023? But here's my big question.
Mm-hmm.
Sara Georgini, Historians of the Movies Productions, has bought the rights to Guys and Dolls. We're going to remake this movie. I want for you to cast this film.
Whew.
Just the four leads. I want you to give me the 4 leads.
I am going to stick. I think they have a good idea for the male leads. So I do like Channing Tatum. Because he can dance. So I will absolutely.
Channing Tatum as who?
So Channing Tatum as Sky Masterson. Absolutely. Okay. No question. I think that I'd like to see, I think they had Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Nathan Detroit. And I could see that, thinking to some of his roles where he's gotten a little shady. And he certainly has the right physique. I mean, it's whether or not he can sing like Sinatra, I don't know just yet.
He's in one of my favorite dancing scenes in any film whatsoever.
All right, all right,
500
all
Days
right.
of
What
Summer.
scene is that? Tell the
500
people
days
what
of
scene is that?
500 Days of Summer, when he like, after things were consummated and he like walks out to Hall and Oates, is you make my dreams come true. That whole, I'm a sucker for big, in movies, like big choreographed dancing scenes. I am down, where people just like, maybe I do like musicals.
Musicals will always get you.
I wasn't like expecting to have like this moment where I was like self discovery, but okay. All right. So you've got, all right. So I've got a couple people in mind here, but I want to hear your thoughts. So you've got Channing Tatum and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is our 1A, 1B. And what about the women, the roles of Sarah and
Adelaide.
Adelaide, thank you.
So I think I would maybe change things up a little bit. I'd love to see Ariana DeBose again in anything from West Side Story to now. She's great, but I would put her.
Did you see when she did the Oscar award thing for when she announced the Oscars the other night? And she started crying as she was reading it. I was done. I was totally sold. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
I love it. But I would actually, because every revival is a little different, and if I'm producing this, I'm going to make some changes. So I would put Ariana DeBose in as Sarah Brown, and I would add dance scenes so she and Channing Tatum could, because of course I would add dance scenes. Because those two dancing I think that they would have really good kind of chemistry. I could see that. And I'd like to change things up with the going to Cuba as a strange exotic thing moment. So that might be interesting. And then I think actually I would do a reunion and take Zooey Deschanel back to her blonde roots and have her as Adelaide for her Joseph Gordon-Levitt, because she can sing. That's my crack casting.
Okay. All right. That's good, because that whole scene in 500. Listen, I'm not afraid of spoilers. If you haven't seen 500 Days of Summer, shame on you. Because that movie hurts. That movie hurts. But I'm gonna disagree with you on the sky role, because I feel like I'm gonna go Ryan Gosling, and then opposite him for Sarah's role, I'm gonna go Emma Stone, because I can't leave shit laying where it was at the end of La La Land. I cannot do it.
You just want to read that.
Yeah, I want that movie back. I've never had a movie hurt me so much.
All right, I have a related story on this one.
Okay.
I have a related Brando story, but finish your casting first.
Okay. Well, somebody hit me with an AMA. I was doing like one of those AMAs on Twitter the other night because they didn't want to clean a house. And like somebody was like, have you ever cried during a movie? And I'm like, of course I am. Like, I cry all the time. I'm a big baby. But I've never had a movie made me like get up and like throw things across the house like I did in the last 10 minutes of La La Land, which is why that movie is one of my favorites of all time, because it just absolutely gutted me. The emotional ride it takes you on. It's a beautiful film. I love. Gee, I do like musicals. Love La La Land like so much, but I can't watch it anymore because it hurts too goddamn much. So those are my 1, 2, and I'm gonna go Joseph Gordon-Levitt. That's fine with me. I'll take her. Although I do like Ariana DeBose. Man, she's really good.
She's great.
I'm gonna go really See, what if we could put Gosling and Stone back together, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Zooey Deschanel back? I feel like that's probably too cutesy. I don't know that Joseph Gordon-Levitt has the down on his luck thing, and I don't think that Sinatra did actually either. I think that this kind of it's you really kind of have to have a guy a little bit older for Detroit. I don't know.
I love that we took like a reunion vibe for this casting, because that's actually what happened. So the year before they did Guys and Dolls, Marlon Brando and Gene Simmons played a doomed set of love interests in a movie called Desiree, where Brando played Napoleon Bonaparte and she was Desiree, the first love of his life. So actually, the audiences had kind of had this little historical romance kind of based in reality, but not exactly blockbuster like the year before. And then they reteamed for Guys and Dolls. So actually it would have been a familiar setup to people in that period. But if you want to see Brando as Napoleon, please go ahead and Google it because it is worth it. That is all I have to say on that movie.
That wasn't uncommon for the era, though, right? I don't really feel like we get that quite enough today, which is why I like the Gosling Stone thing so much, because they've been in several films together, and that chemistry between them is just outstanding. But, I'm obviously thinking about Hepburn and Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
You would see multiple films, Bogey and Bacall, obviously, like where these actors and actresses would be opposite one another multiple times. And I kind of liked that. Like, it was, they take on different dimensions and so forth.
I think that's true. And you used to, I mean, in its heyday, really, even though the studio system constrained a lot of opportunities for people, it did open up musicals in a way that you had these teams like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, who were just absolutely epic to watch. And you knew, even though she had to do all of it backwards and in heels, that they would be fun to see over and over and over again. And often the plots are paper thin in a musical, right? Like that's kind of the thing. Everything is kind of organized.
You don't care. You're going for them.
But you didn't care. I mean, you would have shown up to see Brando sing. That was the thing. And that's kind of the bottom line of why Sinatra hated it. Like, they weren't queuing up to see Sinatra sing. They were queuing up to see what everyone else would do, which I think is just really kind of interesting. But there are some like Broadway favorites in there. And I have a favorite number in the show. Do you have a favorite number in the show?
So I'm partial to two, actually. So a few for Tin Horns, obviously, because of that whole thing. Like the song itself is just great. I love the song. But I really did love it. Forgive me if I get this wrong. The Craps Shoot number at the end. Like I just
Luck Be a Lady.
The big production out of it.
Luck Be a Lady is an excellent choice.
What are your thoughts on Brando?
He does okay. He does fine with the singing. A lot of it is kind of like pitching the words to the right key more than like full on singing. And you'll notice he doesn't really have to dance, which is probably a mercy. But I think that is, he is at his most charming. There are a couple of moments, though, where he doesn't have choreography, but he invents some for his character that just fits so well. If I could, zoom in on exactly one thing to slow-mo, when he goes to the Craps Ballet and he comes down to the sewer, he scoots down the ladder, in one full move, the coolest way anyone could possibly enter a sewer, except for maybe, I don't know, a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. But it's immediately you have a sense of how cool he is, how smooth, how he walks in and owns a room, even if he's not walking into a room. It's the most brilliant thing. But all that said, my favorite number is Sit Down, You're Rocking the Boat. Because Stubby Kaye, who is kind of a Broadway veteran who's cast in that as Nicely, really gets everything going. And he has an interesting little arc too, even though he's a minor character. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting because when they pan around that room, you see how the palette has changed so much. So people have very assigned colors, right, throughout it. So Sinatra's usually in pinstripes. When he goes to the hot box, all the chairs are pinstripes too. So you realize this is his domain. Sky Masterson usually has one accent color, so he's always between good and bad. Mm-hmm. Sarah always is fiddling with her second button because she's trying to figure out, what kind of woman she wants to be and how free she wants to be with everything. But she's in that very militant red, which we haven't talked about, the Save a Soul mission and what they are and what they do. But it's kind of, Salvation Army-esque is the idea. And so they get these very prim, militaristic, sharp kind of things. But then she goes to Cuba and she kind of lightens up into this purplish suit, the neckline changes, everything is different. And then by the end of the kind of the denouement where they're all at the mission meeting, all the gamblers, when they are singing that song and they pan around, they all start to have little touches of red for the first time in the movie, really, which is striking because you can see their souls are being saved. Red is the color of the mission. Like this is so to me, there's so much going on in that scene. And also it's just fun and singable. Like that was something we sang around the house growing up.
All right, I quiz you on this. I gave you a heads up on this one yesterday. Speaking of singable, favorite Sinatra song all time. What do you got?
I've got the world on a string.
I've got the world on the string. All right.
Life is a beautiful thing.
Man, my Sinatra song was way less happy than that one.
Which one did you?
I went for One for My Baby.
Oh yeah. We are polar opposites on this one. That kind of speaks to his incredible range, doesn't it? Like there are so many ones you could pick. Because I thought of My Way, but I think Sinatra is very generational, and so many of the songs that he's done have been covered by other people. So to me, I know he's New York, New York, but for my Gen X era, that's a Liza Minnelli signature piece. So I wouldn't give it to him necessarily. But yeah, we did pick very different things. Why did you pick that one?
Oh, well, it's easy. I was introduced to that song. There was a film came out on HBO Productions, and I haven't been able to find it. I've been wanting to watch it again, called The Rat Pack, which actually had Ray Liotta as Sinatra, and Joe Mantegna, I think, is Dean Martin, and a few other folks. And he sings at the very end of the song. And I hadn't heard it again for years. And then I kept looking for, I kept looking for the song. I thought it was like Play It Again, Joe, or something like that. I didn't know. And then I heard it again on the radio only a couple months ago. And I was like, oh, that's it. I don't know. It's just something the way that he sings it. And I think also when I hear that song, I kind of see Ray Liotta, who didn't look like Sinatra at all, obviously, but I thought was really good in that. So I don't know. I just kind of imprint on that. I am a Yankees fan, so I do like New York. New York. I'm the only Yankees fan from the state of Kentucky. People always like, oh, you like... Yeah, I'm a winner, okay? That's what I do. I win. So do the Yankees. This is an anti-Boston Red Sox place. I know you're in Boston, but, are you a Yankees person? Who's your team?
We grew up cheering for the Mets in Brooklyn. And I soon learned
Brooklyn's a Mets place, yeah.
Yeah, I learned when I came to college in Boston not to invoke any Mets memories from 1986 real quick. So I will cheer for the home team wherever I am for the most part. It was really exciting to be here. I was here when the Red Sox reversed the curse, and I was here when they won again a few years later. And that was just such a lift to the city. But you have to know, like, people had been waiting so long. People had really invested time, money, and effort for generations. So it was very much like an emotional outpouring. I was not as, invested in it, but it was a happy moment for the city.
You were talking about this movie as an American movie, or a movie about America. Mm-hmm. I think of it actually as a movie about New York. It's actually how I am thinking it. What's the better city, New York or Boston?
I can't choose between my two hometowns.
Yeah, you absolutely can. You have to. That's the rules. What you got, New York or Boston?
I mean,
because the answer is Chicago.
Brooklyn born, Boston raised. That's my answer for you.
I'm Kentucky born, Louisiana raised.
There you go. I will hedge on that because I love them both. I can't choose. That's an honest answer. But I do think you're totally right that it's a movie about New York, because I think Runyon subtitled it like a Broadway fable or something, which is exactly what it is. I mean, it's not something that really, it starts out as a morality tale and it talks a lot about morality, but it tells you a lot about the city in that moment. And it did make me think I should go back and read more about what New York was like in the 1950s, because it was so heavily reconstructed for the musical. And I thought I wonder if I know my hometown as well as I think I do, which is another thing about musicals, because they really put a premium on glossy imagination. You come away from them thinking, I should really read some history, or I should really listen to more music like that, or I should know why those songs and dances came through the way that they did. So I always find them to be so, I know the word here in academic speak would be generative, but I just find that they're such a catalyst There's so much you can kind of take from a musical like Guys and Dolls and shake out on the table like little gems and then be like, oh, that's shiny. I wish I could look that up. I usually find watching a musical, I stop to Google more stuff than I planned, which is probably why I love them so much.
It's funny because you talk about you're interested in learning about like 1950s New York. For me, I'm actually driven by film to learn like 1940s post-war Los Angeles.
Oh,
Because my
interesting.
understanding of that is that I would, oh yeah, like, obviously, I do early native North America, but my mind's eye, I want to go be LA Confidential and have like a guy with a muted trumpet following me around as I solve crimes, and look for dames. So, that's like, people ask me like, where else would you study? I'm like, I want to go study Los Angeles in 1947. That's what I
You
want to do.
can. I mean, my second book is all a 20th century tale, and I didn't know I'd be writing that.
Is it really?
So, yeah,
Talk to us about your second book. Can you divulge the details of the second book,
I
or
can. Yes.
broad generalizations, or shall I just make it up?
I absolutely am happy to talk about it. I'm writing about the American Library in Paris, which began in 1920 as part of the American Library Association's war service to get books to soldiers, and rapidly evolved into kind of a beacon of light and literature for the last century in Paris. It's also been a place where there's plenty of spies in the stacks. A lot of the librarians have double lives, and they have a really interesting of how they handle the occupation of Paris by creating an underground reading system for like a book lending system for Jewish readers. They have a really interesting kind of backstory, but it's taken me in all kinds of directions an early Americanist doesn't usually go. So dealing with new sources like radio interviews or film, things I don't deal with a lot in 1797 has been a really fun experience, and developing my French language skills for it has also been great. But it's super interesting. I've been doing a lot of oral histories with, most recently, with some of the descendants of the staff who worked there, especially during World War II. And I've been getting to know Paris in the 1950s. So I've dealt a lot already in earlier chapters with people you may know, like Ernest Hemingway, who helped to edit the library newsletter.
I was waiting to talk about him. I was waiting. I was about to ask. Ready. I'm an unrepentant Papa Bear guy. All right.
I've got great Hemingway stuff.
A Movable Feast is probably my favorite book. Oh, yeah.
Drinking and writing his way through Paris.
Like a boss. Did you see Midnight in Paris? I know a lot of people. I was going to show it on HATM one night. I got a huge pushback. People are like, we can't show it because of Woody Allen and blah, blah, blah. And I cowered. I pulled it off the air. Did you see this film? Are you familiar with the whole A Movable Feast?
I've seen the movie, yes. Yes.
Okay. Thoughts on it? Because I love Corey Stoll as Hemingway more than anything.
I'm not a big Woody Allen fan by any means, and I think there's certainly his fingerprints all over it, obviously. But the personalities, I think, are great. They really kind of come through beautifully in how messy and interrelated all of those people were in each other's lives. I've been using some of the correspondence between Hemingway and his friends, people like the Benets and the Fitzgeralds and Dorothy Parker, and they are just a sharp, hardworking, hard partying crew. But then they have these other kind of very human moments that you think like they're so iconic and so larger than life. And then, like Hemingway has issues at his hotel. So like you think like, oh, everyone goes through stuff, even you. Not everything made it onto the page. So it's been really interesting to kind of think about Americans in Paris in a different way, and the intellectual circles they create, the espionage networks that they're part of. And it's kind of in many ways, a big reveal or not of the fact that libraries are loud, that in this age of museums are not neutral, libraries are also places where people can access information and knowledge in ways that they really couldn't before in the 20th century. And American Library in Paris is one of the places that made that possible. So thinking about libraries as kind of hotbeds of revolution and really where cutting edge stuff happens, is important, I think, especially in this day and age, when lots of libraries face budget cuts or librarians face all kinds of repercussions for the materials that they choose to share in the name of what they should be doing, which is sharing knowledge. So it's been really interesting to kind of take this cultural institution, the library, and think about it in all these contexts in Paris. So coming soon, Our Library in Paris from Oxford University Press.
Oh, very nice. Do we have a year on that?
We're hoping for next year.
I once knew a librarian who referred to them as community hubs. Like this was the places where they would go. Actually, no, I refer to them as, you know what? I once knew me and I called them libraries, community hubs. And I want to go back to this because all I want in life is a Hemingway and Fitzgerald buddy comedy of them banging around Paris in the 1920s. That's all I want. I want Sideways. Only it's Hemingway. I mean, isn't that what? Couldn't you see Fitzgerald as like Miles and Hemingway as Jack in like Paris? I mean, this has to happen. That's all I want in life. We're running past an hour now, which I knew we would. Talk to me about your 3 favorite musicals.
Oh, but we've done them. So I'm going to say Guys and Dolls, obviously. Or am I supposed to pick 3 besides Guys and Dolls? Where are the rules here?
3 besides Guys and Dolls. I make the rules arbitrarily. If you say a thing I don't like, I will change the rules.
Does it have to be a movie, or can it just be musicals? Period.
No, it has to be a movie. It's the story that's at the movies, not one of those at the musicals. Ugh.
All right, original West Side Story.
Okay.
Original West Side Story for sure.
All right.
Absolutely. Second, and this is really in no order. I'm going to say this because I love the stage version. So it exists as multiple movies. Phantom of the Opera. No question. I know every line. So I will go with Phantom of the Opera. I know Gerard Butler sings, and I agree with what I think you're going to say, which is he's more effective on planes than behind an organ. But I love, and you can go and see the old Lon Chaney version of it. Like there's been a ton of Phantoms of the Opera. So I will go with that one. And then finally, I'm going to say Moulin Rouge. What a great movie. I remember seeing it with a bunch of friends when it first came out in a movie theater. We all went after work and we thought like, oh my God, it's a long musical. And I did a little persuading on the musical front, as you know I would.
Okay.
And I think we were just transfixed. It was something that was so different at the time. It was not the standard issue stuff that was on movie screens. And I remember we got to the end, we were like, oh, can we stay and watch the next showing? Like it was the most amazing kind of rebirth of American movie musicals. And it was such a great kind of mashup, that distinctive Baz Luhrmann kind of cinematography and palette and costuming. I absolutely loved it. So it's one of my favorites. The tango scene to Roxanne. I mean, it's just an amazing movie.
I've never seen Moulin Rouge.
What are your top 3 musicals there, Jason? You got any top 3 musicals?
Well, I guess I said La La Land earlier, right? So that counts as one.
Yeah.
Top. Okay, let me think through this. Top 3 musicals. Definitely the Muppet movie is.
Yes, excellent choice.
The Muppet movie is a musical.
Excellent choice.
Thank you. I mean, like I can karaoke like the entire thing. Okay, so I got Muppet movie. I got La La Land. Hold on. Let me think here. I'm going here. You know, I've never seen the one that people like so much from the 1970s with the time warp dance.
Rocky Horror?
I've never seen it.
Oh, you should do that on ATM at some point. That is an event in and of itself.
Third, it's like there's movies I like that music play a huge role in, but like I don't think that they count unless someone like kind of spontaneously breaks out into song. So I'm trying to think of the third musical. What? I'm working here. I'm really struggling here to think about a third. Oh shit! What are the musicals that have come out in the last like?
What about anything about like a Treasury Secretary?
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Hamilton's fine, I guess. That doesn't really feel like a musical movie, though. It's like, oh, you know what? White Christmas. I'm gonna go with that.
Oh, that's a classic. Well done.
All right, I'm gonna go with White Christmas. I'm gonna go La La Land, the Muppet movie, and White Christmas. Although I want to say La Bamba. It's not a musical, but like musical, it's like, it's a movie.
I'll give that. I'll give that because that was a great HATM too.
That's cheating.
No, that's not cheating.
Well, LDP joined in that night.
He's amazing. That was amazing to see. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a fun night. It was like that, and the night that Marshall Teague, who like tweeted in while we were watching Roadhouse, who was like tweeting, if Marshall's listening right now, like he was at a wedding and he was like low key texting during the wedding. So while we were watching, he played Jimmy, the bad guy in Roadhouse, and he was like texting along with us during that night. It was like I'd message him, was like, "Hey, would you do this?" He's like, "Yeah."
We did Dirty Dancing, right?
No, and Dirty Dancing. No, Dirty Dancing is my number 8 favorite film of all time.
Oh, we should definitely do that.
I'm waiting for we'll do Dirty Dancing on the pod. Like, I'm like right now. Like, pause this and we'll kick back up because I don't even have to watch. I've seen Dirty Dancing in the theaters like no less than 5 times. Like every time there's like a revival that like on the anniversaries, I will go see Dirty Dancing. I love all things Swayze except for Ghost because it has feelings. But like, I've seen Dirty Dancing so freaking many times, and that's a movie that is talk about memory. You give me a movie that's got like a third person discussion in there. Yeah, no, Dirty Dancing is my jam. But they're not together though. That couple doesn't make it, do they?
Yeah, I have a question for you. So let's say Jason Herbert Productions acquires the sequel rights to Guys and Dolls. What's the one character you want to do a spin-off sequel on?
Oh, spin-off sequel on Guys and Dolls? Hold on, I'll tell you. I want to do Big Jules' henchman, the guy who was like speaking up for Jules. I can't remember his name. I want to follow him around. That guy can be Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Now, like, what if in the sequel we can follow the kids?
Oh, little guys and little dolls.
Yeah, and like find out like where they go off to and so forth. That would be that's
where
I'm going with that. Is like gonna.
That's good. I like that.
That's a bit of a cop out, but like.
No, that's fair.
Or no. I've got a better one. The guy who serves them the milkshakes in Havana. I want to know his backstory. That's an archival piece. How can we reconstruct 1955 Havana through this one guy who speaks English to tourists in Havana in I guess, was the movie in 55 or 33? Like set in, what year is the movie set?
It's made in 55, set in 33.
Okay, so this guy's in 1933. Like, what does Havana look like? I want to follow his kids. Because his kids are going to have to live through the revolution. If that guy's having kids, his kids are going to be 33 to 59. His kids are going to be 24 years old, leaving Havana right at, oh my gosh, his kids end up serving drinks at the hotel in Dirty Dancing. Or maybe that's the guy who's serving them drinks. It's like the guy who Max is talking to at the very end. He's the conductor. He was actually serving drinks at night, but was actually a musician on the side. And that's actually the conductor. That's the story. That's how you connect Guys and Dolls to Dirty Dancing. Print.
I can't top that. Well done, sir.
My mind goes all kinds of places. All right, Sara Georgini, are you ready for the question of the night?
Ready. Bring it on.
Is Guys and Dolls a history movie?
Yes.
All right, that was good. Would you care to expand? Yes. Is anyone still listening? After I went and learned all about like now I gotta go find the guy's name for Dirty Dancing. We're doing a Dirty Dancing pod. So
please do. Oh, I'm there for that. That is some really hard choreography. Like the lift is not the only thing. There is a lot going on there dance-wise that is really hard.
Oh, there's so Dirty Dancing is now my number 1 or my number 2 film that I want to do on HATM. And the number 1 is Singles.
Wait, what's your number 1? Singles, wait, what's the number 1?
Singles. Singles from 1992. It talks about Seattle and all that stuff. Okay. Best soundtrack. I mean, you talk about 2 films with amazing soundtracks. Singles and Dirty Dancing. This boom, boom.
Oh, I was nowhere near Rushmore. I was nowhere near your neighborhood, so I thought I'd drop by. Like, that is a great movie.
Oh my god, that's one of the great lines. It's a little stalky, but Cameron Crowe always has movies that
it is stalky, but it's a great line.
It works though. The way that he delivers that, where he's like, I was just nowhere near you. And then he hits her with a smile, and Kira Sedgwick is just done. She's butter. And then the very end, when he's on the phone in the bathroom and he's like, "You belong with me," and then she comes back at the very end. What took you so long? I'm stuck in traffic. Just nowhere near your neighborhood.
I should rewatch that. I haven't seen that in forever. You're right. That's a great soundtrack, though. That's a very solid soundtrack overall.
You and I are both baby Generation X, so we're tail end of X. Yeah, we're tail end of X. So that's our generation's film. So we need.
Have we ever done?
And the Dirty Dancing.
Have we ever done Reality Bites, which is one of the finest movies of all time?
Oh, we need to do a singles versus
Reality
Bites.
What is
Reality
that?
Bites is the biggest. It's a shite film. Ethan Hawke is, first of all, find for me a character in Reality Bites that's likable at all. Because it's not Troy. I mean, maybe it's Ben Stiller.
Troy. No.
Winona Ryder doesn't belong with Ethan. That dude is self-obsessed. She's insufferable. Stiller at least has an understanding of what he's trying to do and so forth. It just felt too cliche and too, I don't know. I'm not a Reality Bites guy. I'll watch it. We can do a singles versus Reality Bites. That's the one we should do, is have a throwdown, because the soundtrack on that is also okay.
I would find a way.
Good soundtrack. Big Mountains, Baby I Love Your Way is outstanding, Oh, and there's a great song by World Party on the Reality Bites soundtrack you cannot find on Spotify or anywhere else. You have to find it on Apple, which is When You Come Back to Me. That song is outstanding, but I'm ruining that sort. If you haven't seen Reality Bites, that film came out in 1994, and that's, oh my Jesus Christ, that's 29 years ago.
Is that Empire Records era as well? Yeah.
So Empire Records comes out in, I think, 97.
Okay.
96, 97, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, so that era.
And very much basically. So, yeah, only I can't stand Liv Tyler. I think she's awful in that film. I think Liv Tyler's awful in most everything. But if you're listening, hi, Liv Tyler. Hope you're having a great day. Not a big fan of Empire Records is hit and miss. Good soundtrack again. Rex Manning Day, just a little skeevy. I don't know. Renee Zellweger, before anybody knows who she is, clearly steals every scene she's in that movie. She's good. I would buy stock in her today. I don't know why. We've had a McConaissance. We've had a Brendan Fraser sans. I want a Renee Zellweger sans. She's good.
Oh, I love that.
She was good in Cold Mountain.
She's good. She's so good as Roxy Hart in Chicago. And that's a role that loads of people have done and is not easy in any way, shape, or form. So I would give her a big up. I do love when HATM does action movies, I have to say. I'm very glad you did the best Christmas movie ever, which is Die Hard. And I'm sure that you have already talked about it many times on this podcast. Have you done anything? Have you ever done Speed, another movie that I know quite well?
No, I would happily do Speed. And we can get a few people together to do Speed, because Speed falls into this, for listeners of the HATM podcast, you'll be aware of Herbert's theory on action figures, which I have this whole thesis on this movement of Schwarzenegger and Stallone being the being the Achilles of the 1980s, moving into the Odysseus of the 1990s, starting with Bruce Willis in Die Hard. And then you start to get these less ultra macho dudes, these smaller framed guys who outwit guys like, was it Jack? What's his last name in Speed? It's just Keanu, right? I want a Keanu movie. I want another Speed film. Because I know they made Speed 2. Did you ever see The Lake House?
Yep.
With Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock?
Yep.
Big fan. Loved it. Big fan. I love time that the end where we should do a Speed Lake House film.
I'm 100% there for it, because Dennis Hopper is your villain. That is such a great movie. I love that movie because there are 3 clear major. It's a classic Jan de Bont frame where there's 3 big action sequences and they're spaced perfectly throughout the movie. You're somewhat invested, but not really. You get a Spitfire heroine who actually saves the day and does all the hard work.
She's great. Wildcat.
She's great. And she was really, I think that was, aside from Love Potion #9, which I could also talk about, that was the movie where
Tate Donovan. Yeah, her and Tate Donovan were in that film. No, she just emerged because she was phenomenal in that. And also you have Jeff Daniels, who has maybe more range than any single actor alive.
Yeah, there's so many good actors in that action movie, which is I think what was key to like the early diehards too. There were legit good actors in a big popcorn movie.
All the way through 3, yes. After 3, not as, I mean, I'm not buying stock in Justin Long. In, was it the techno one?
Yeah, that's right. That's no one.
The Justin Long and Maggie Q, who I actually like very much, and then the guy that plays Raylan
Well, she's
Givens.
fantastic.
Oh, I see. I wanted more of her from the Mission, because she was in Mission Impossible 3. I thought that cast should have had more people carrying forward, because I think Mission Impossible 3 is low key the second best Mission Impossible we've had. I think it's really, really easily the best villain we've had in any Mission Impossible, because Philip Seymour Hoffman was just so good.
Again, a very solid actor, right? Stage trained.
He's okay. Yeah. He's okay. I mean, God, when he died, like, because anytime Philip Seymour Hoffman showed up, it was gonna be. I mean, he's so good in everything he did. So I don't know how we're like tying him into Geisendal. I will like the spirit of Philip Seymour Hoffman pervades over the sequel to Guys and Dolls, which is set in Havana in 1997 after the fall of Empire Records.
It would be super cool if they set the Guys and Dolls in Havana and then they went to New York for a day on the date. Like if you flip the locales.
Well, here's the question, right? So Havana in 1950. So they're making this film in 55, set in 33. They need a place that is exotic yet approachable. That place is not Havana in 2023. So where is it? I don't know where Americans go, because Havana was really rivaling Vegas at this point in time. And the plans were like it was gonna. I mean, maybe I guess Miami might have to be the state, but Miami's awful. Miami's just the worst.
Well, it's hard to know. And I rewatched this to do my homework for you. And there's an interesting little moment, and this speaks to the conspicuous consumption part of it. When they come back and like they take a cab back to the mission, and like a couple doors down from the mission, right when they get back from Cuba, one of the storefront's names is Having a Drink, HAV POS NA drink. And so it made me think, like, did they go to what was then considered an ethnic neighborhood in New York, like a little Havana, or did they actually go to Cuba? And it made me rethink, like, the kind of commercialism of ethnic profiles as kind of like an exotic little, like you went to Little Italy or you went to Little Odessa or you went to like Little something. And I thought like, oh, well, that's actually interesting, but I can't tell at all from the movie what they wanted me to believe. But it was the first time I noticed it. And I was like, you just did this whole thing. And then it's a punchline that you blink and you miss it. It was a very interesting kind of comment on 1950s culture.
Well, I hadn't even thought about that. I'll have to like keep an idea on that. I'm thinking about other places you could do, like Little Lincoln, Nebraska. Like, let's that would be an exciting place. Have people fly.
I have to say, I have been to Lincoln, Nebraska, and it is awesome. I had a wonderful time in Lincoln, Nebraska. They have an amazing...
But you did not stay because there's no reason to stay.
To be fair, that university has an amazing contemporary art museum with some of my favorite, like, African-American expressionists like Norman Lewis on view there. Like, they had an amazing and very open to the public kind of area, I think, to showcase their art. And they had a fun little coffee house scene over by the university. So I give them high thumbs up, I guess.
Right. I haven't been to Lincoln. I've been to Omaha, which I actually thought was cool. I thought Omaha was actually surprisingly, I actually liked Omaha. So we'll have to figure out where we're going to set the sequel to Guys and Dolls once we are able to. I guess I'll kick it on GoFundMe here in a minute. And
our people will be in touch, my people and your people. So we'll figure it out.
We'll set in Providence, but Boston and Providence have an issue, right? Like they've got a rivalry.
It's hard to know. I mean, I think we're all kind of part of the same block of New England, more or less, and everyone kind of hunkers down this time of year with the weather. So I can't say there's any rivalry right now. We're all kind of in the same boat of perseverance.
I don't know what you're talking about as far as weather. It's like 94 degrees outside right now, so I got the AC kicking.
Wow, I'll take it.
I got Turtle Fest tomorrow. It's nice out here right now. I'm just trying to figure out like which flip flops I wear. Like, oh, do I get the ones with leather? Got to make a public appearance.
I do not approve of flip flops at all.
That's what we were in Havana. I'm telling you that. I'm going to make some Cuban coffee after I get done with this.
A milkshake, perhaps.
I got plenty of rum. Believe me, that's the Hemingway in me. There's no shortage of rum at Casa Herbert. So Casa Gringo is what I call this place. Casa Gringo. So
this has been a lot of fun, and I think I want to go on the record and make sure that people know how grateful we all are that you started Historians of the Movies, because it is such a fun community on Sunday nights. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, Jason is blushing furiously, as well he should, because it has been, I think, just such a bridge and a point of connection for people, especially during the pandemic, just to get together and chat about a movie and all kinds of shenanigans. So really, thank you from all of us.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for being part of these shenanigans, including the one we've been having for the last 90 minutes and 4 seconds and counting. So we will get together and do more. We're definitely, the next one we're doing is Dirty Dancing. Just tell me when and where we're doing the Dirty Dancing pod. That's got to be coming out.
You got it.
And that's a wrap here at Historians of the Movies podcast. Thank you so much to our Broadway producer, Sara Georgini, for being here today. We couldn't have made this episode without you, Sarah. That was amazing. Thank you, of course, to our producer, Fletcher Powell, who is singing right along with us right now. I'm being told he is not actually singing along. He is doing technical wizardry on this episode. But thank you, Fletcher, for being here and taking care of all of that stuff for us. And of course, thank you to everybody for continuing to listen, to share these podcasts with your friends. The HATM podcast is continuing to grow every single week, and we could not be doing that without you. So please do continue to tell your friends, share this on Twitter, share this via text, whether it's on Spotify or iTunes or wherever it is that you're listening. So thank you so much for being part of this. Keep coming back. This is we're going to keep growing. And we're going to keep having a lot of fun with this. So thank you so much for being here, and we will see you next time. Exiting stage left. Herbert out. Bye.